Good evening. I'm Pittsburgh City Councilman Daniel Lavelle,
And I'm Councilman Reverend Ricky Burgess.
and we welcome you back to Black Pittsburgh Matters. Black Pittsburgh Matters is a series of virtual town hall meetings affirming a citywide agenda that Black Pittsburgh does indeed matter. Black Pittsburgh Matters mean that Black lives matter. We must protect the health and safety of Black people. It means that Black communities matter. We must focus on rebuilding Black communities. And it means that Black wealth matters. We must focus on increasing Black employment and entrepreneurship.
The Black community has been disproportionately affected by concurrent crises. The COVID-19 pandemic and its economic crisis, and race relations, and the unveiling that really racial equity is a national epidemic in our country. They're both public health crises. Normally, in times of crisis and great change, we'll be coming to you as the Black elected officials of Pittsburgh, having meetings across the city with our constituents, partners, and allies. Since we cannot do so safely in the current pandemic, we're now using this media and platform to come to you in the ways in which we can, to talk about what we're doing, discuss policy and legislation concerning Black Pittsburgh. These meetings will be available via Facebook, YouTube, and the city's cable channel. You can contact or ask questions via the Black Pittsburgh Matters Facebook page or email us at blackpghmatters, that's blackpghmatters@gmail.com. And of course, you can comment, ask us questions through our live feed right now. In honor of Women's History Month, this evening, we're going to begin, I believe, a series of conversations about Black women.
Given that as you mentioned, Brad, that we are indeed in Women's History Month, this evening we are looking to highlight the experiences of Black women in Pittsburgh. There are statistics highlighting how difficult the city is for Black women. There are extreme disparities for the infant mortality rates of Black women here, as well as the poverty rate, college completion rate, and share of the workforce. These statistics indicate we have a lot of work to do as a city to uplift and support our Black women.
Yeah, I've been working, as you know, in this issue a long time. Before I became a member of council, I ran an agency specifically to provide education and counseling support to young girls, mostly young Black girls. On council, I had, when I was in council, a young woman in my district, Cassandra Wade, was shot and killed by her boyfriend, who later killed himself. But the officers came to the house. She called the police officers. They knocked on the door, talked to him only, and he said she was fine. And when they left, he killed her. And so because of that incident, we were able to work with the police and to bring to Pittsburgh the Maryland Lethality Assessment Model, which now is part of the training of all police officers. And now, if they suspect domestic violence, there's a protocol they have to follow. They have to, of course, talk to the man or woman that they think is being domestically abused, go through a checklist, and then call, if they, depending on how they score in the protocol, make hotline call right then to resources for that person. Judge Spurgeon, a common pleas judge, said that he thought this was who was on, then it was the DA over prosecuting domestic violence cases. He said it was the single most important tool in the last 50, 60 years for addressing domestic abuse. And I'm real proud of that. I don't talk about it so much because it's really more about protecting the lives of people rather than take any political credit.
Yeah, until the Gender Equity Commission's report came out, I didn't have a full understanding of the statistical bit. They laid out statistically all the challenges. And so that's when I really began to understand it. But prior to that, maybe about 5, 6 years ago now, the Pittsburgh Black Elected Officials Coalition, as you were there and remember, we were hosting town hall conversations around the city. And what we discovered during those town hall meetings was that if we were really going to try to address the issues, that when 70% of your households living in poverty are headed up by single women of color, when you really begin to understand what was happening, that we would have to produce a report that also spoke directly to them. And we ended up having a very insightful and enlightening meeting for me it was at Carlo University one Saturday when we specifically held a town hall meeting just for women to come and talk about their specific experiences here in the city and how the Peace and Justice Initiative that we were trying to shape, how it needed to be sort of centered and focused on their lived experiences if we were actually going to begin turning the tides in this city and really begin lifting our communities out of poverty. So it's been a learning experience for me. I've sort of been slow to the legislative process. Obviously, after the report came out, you and I took a series of legislative actions that we thought would be helpful and uplift our city. But we do have the experts here with us this evening. And so maybe they can tell us if we were helpful or whether or not there's more work for us to do.
Pittsburgh's Gender Equity Commission, of course, highlighted some of the inequities Black women in the city face. With a view toward uplifting and supporting Black women to ensure Pittsburgh is a city for all, we want to talk this evening about some of the underlying problems Black women face here, as well as the work being done to fix these issues, including how the Gender Equity Report has influenced city's policies and how we continue this work of uplifting and supporting Black women in Pittsburgh. We are deeply honored to be joined by Dr. Jane, the Executive Director of the Gender Equity Commission, Ms. Brooks Woods, the co-founder of the EARN Institute and CEO of the Pittsburgh Business Group on Health, and Oliver Beasley, Policy Analyst for the Office of Equity. All three of you, we're just glad to have you. Welcome to this evening's Town Hall.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll start with Dr. Jane, if I may. Dr. Jane has mentioned sort of at the beginning, I mentioned the Gender Equity Commission. Can you tell us a little bit about the Gender Equity Commission, what your focus is, the work that you do, and maybe if you can even educate us a little bit on the report?
Thank you. And I hope everyone will call me Anu. It's easier, but thank you, Councilmember. So the Gender Equity Commission is now 3 years old, and we are part of an international network of human rights cities that we've passed an ordinance that requires us to have an eye to women's rights throughout municipal government. And so I'm the one staff person, and my goal is to help hear diverse community voices about gender-based barriers, and then identify what policy changes the city can make to overcome those barriers, to dismantle those barriers. And the two pieces, one is we need to be in constant engagement with diverse, especially Black communities, given our report, and then to be aware of where are the most impactful changes going to happen, that when we do our report again in 10 years, we will show that there has been improvement. We need to benchmark. And that's what our report was really meant to do. We asked for an analysis of publicly available data. We did not set out to do a report about Black women in Pittsburgh, although we suspected what the data was going to show us, because of course Black women and Black communities have been telling people that there are these structural inequities. But now I use the report to basically say to people, it's racism and sexism. I mean, there's no other way to analyze this data than to say these are systemic inequalities where two oppressive systems intersect, and we see it in the data. And we see also how we can start to uplift all of us by starting with those who are most vulnerable to those social determinants of poorer quality of life, that we can change that in the city. And the other thing about the report that's important to know is it compared Pittsburgh to 89 other cities. So we know that lots of changes need to happen on the national, the state, and the county level, but we also can compare ourselves to these cities to say, well, is there a good model for how this other city has made more progress than Pittsburgh in terms of overcoming some of these barriers? And I'm happy to talk more, but I wanted to just give you a sort of high level context for that.
I want to, Jessica, I want to ask you a question. I say this all the time on council, right? I say this, and I'm sure that sometimes council gets tired of me saying the same thing, which is this. If you live in Pittsburgh and you're poor, that's a problem. But if you're Black and poor, it's worse. If you live in Pittsburgh and you're LGBT community, part of the LGBT community, and you have issues, that's bad in Pittsburgh, right? There's homophobia. But if you're Black and LGBTH, then it's worse, right? If you're a woman in Pittsburgh, certainly there's sexism and you make less than men in all sorts of ways that you're oppressed. But if you're Black and female in Pittsburgh, then your situation's worse. So that we find in all these issues, being Black adds an extra layer of difficulty. And so I just, from a personal note, what's been your experience of, working in Pittsburgh and having to react as a Black female?
Wow. Well, my experience has varied significantly over the years from earlier on when I was seeking, internships. And at that time, we had vibrant programs like Inroads that sought after us and had corporate relationships and really ensured that we had an experience that otherwise would not have been afforded to us. And I was privileged to be able to be a part of such programs that I believe in and I believe are lacking today. And in corporate America, it's an area, and without Black mentorship and being able to see Black leaders in senior level positions, you're really fighting for aspiration without really having the example in-house. And that was a large part of my experience earlier in my career. And then, now being a leader and leading a employer coalition where we really have the ability to truly impact a lot of things that this report highlighted were issues. It's being the only one in the room oftentimes and having to break through familiarity and, the ability to really connect with primarily white men in some cases, or white women in other cases, to really be able to make progress and being invited in the rooms. I think I've become skillful and I've built a network over time that has allowed that to be more possible, but it's definitely not been easy to do. And it's not comfortable still. I walk in plenty of rooms that I don't feel welcomed in oftentimes, and it's culture and it's invisible, but you feel it at the same time. And so that's a part of my personal experience. I've also, I'm very close to healthcare. That's very important to me. I have personal experiences throughout that trajectory I just mentioned to you, for having children and having to engage with the healthcare system, and have had very, very difficult experiences in Pittsburgh in our hospitals. So when that report came out, highlighting the Black maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates, however, I have an experience that I'm thankful to be here. I can totally see how that's happened and how it's still happening. And my mother has stories from 40 years ago where similar experiences happened that we're experiencing today. So the experience goes both from personal healthcare experience to employment to just being in our community. So, but thank you for asking and having an interest in that.
So since you ended with healthcare, Jessica, I guess I want to stay there for a second. Can you talk to us a little bit about your work as the CEO of the Pittsburgh Business Group on health and how that may or may not affect what is happening with Black women in health in our city?
Yes. PBGH, Pittsburgh Business Group on Health, is a 40-year-old organization birthed out of the Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce 40 years ago by the C-suite in our region at the time. And 12 company CEOs came together and decided that only employers would really be able to affect healthcare costs if they were independent from the healthcare system leadership as well. So they branched off and became independent. And over time, started sending their HR benefits leaders to really be the primary representatives of the companies in the region. Mostly started by large, self-insured, the bigger companies in our region at the time, Westinghouse, US Steel, Draveau. Now we have a really good mix of employers ranging from 500 employees upwards to 40,000 plus employees. So public, private, Allegheny County school systems, the universities, as well as the banking industry and manufacturing industries are a lot of industries that are represented. Collectively, we represent over 500,000 employees and or families. So we count the employees actually walk into the workplaces or Zoom into their workplaces at this point, and their families that would be on their benefits plan. So that could be their spouses and their children. So collectively, of the 100 employers, that's about 500,000 lives in our region that we touch. And then beyond our region is about 2 million or so. We have not, until this report came out, health equity was not on our agenda. Benefits leaders did not have a strategy. CEOs weren't asking for us to address health equity. What we were used to addressing was cost. That's why we started. Access really became an issue with the Highmark UPMC battle. So that was really the first time in our history as a coalition that we were fighting for access and advocating for access. And then quality, in the last 7 years since I've been leading this organization, we've been focused on quality and outcomes. However, that was still in a homogeneous fashion. We did not consider that outcomes and quality look different and then incorporated that into our strategy. So when that report came out in September 2019, me as a Black woman leader of this organization could not move forward with leading this organization if we did not prioritize health equity as a strategic priority. So there it is. And now that's happening nationally across the country. And so employers have a significant opportunity. What I didn't mention is that our coalition alone spends $5.5 billion on healthcare spending. We have the ability to influence a lot of things in healthcare as the purchaser, as we have the green. So you put money towards outcomes as employers. We have the ability to work and contract differently with our health plans and expect them to have value-based models with the providers in the region and ensure there's an equity lens to that. We have the ability to educate our workforce and our families on the equity outcomes that do exist and equip them for interacting with the healthcare system. So outside of employers, you have health plans, and then you have the state insurance exchange, wherever you may be able to get access, FQHCs, but employers nationally is the largest payer of healthcare. So our influence is significant. And so there's a lot of opportunity with that, including the out-of-pocket costs, co-pays, co-insurance, high deductible health plans, our plan designs, addressing the cost barrier to care. And then once you get access to the care, ensuring that there's equity or accountability for equity in that care and good outcomes.
When we did the wage review study with the city, the mayor's office, union representatives, and we began to look, we did what's called the wage review study, and we interviewed workers at UPMC and workers at Highmark talking about their experience and their wages. And perhaps one of the most heartbreaking stories I heard, and I remember to the day, a young Black woman who had several children who worked at one of the UPMC facilities. And she began to tell me how, even though she was a full-time worker in a UPMC hospital, the health plan that she had was provided for her. She could not take her kids to the emergency room at that hospital because the deductible was so high she couldn't afford it. And I just thought something's wrong, right? When someone's working full-time in a hospital and they cannot take their children to the facility that they're working in, something's wrong. And so we began to argue about, the need for $15 an hour and higher in the healthcare industry. And that we believe, I think it's true, we can all agree that one of the barriers that Black women face is poverty, right? And we have to lift up their wages. And that brings us really to Oliver. Oliver, can you talk to us a little bit about the new program that's being implemented through the mayor's office, that of universal basic income, guaranteed income? Can you talk a little bit about that and how will help women in general, but perhaps Black women specifically?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rev. So it's a guaranteed income pilot that the city of Pittsburgh is looking to partner with One PGH, which is the resiliency nonprofit headed up by the mayor here in the city of Pittsburgh. And the pilot is called Assured Cash Experiment Pittsburgh. And it is meant to be just that, an experiment, a quantitative and qualitative look at what a guaranteed income could do in a city for the size of Pittsburgh. So referencing back to the 2019 Gender Equity Commission report, which all the spark from it got national attention, we did when deciding on what to do a program about, the idea came about to focus it on Black women at or below 50% AMI, since it had already been targeted and it had already been depicted from the report that is our demographic that has the largest disparities from inequities. The mayor decided that was a good idea, and deciding to go 100 women at or below 50% AMI, Black women at or below 50% AMI, and then another 100 from randomly selected neighborhoods around the city, from north, south, east, west, and central regions, and then just a control group, wondering what it would, trying to bring an analytical answer to what a guaranteed income could do, that a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds can get behind, not just the government, not just nonprofit, the private sector, actually using data showing what a guaranteed income floor could and how it could help a population.
So break it down to us. I think so you're saying that 200 women will get a check every month, or tell me exactly what that kind of means?
Yeah, so it's still on theory now. We haven't launched it yet. We're still building it and creating it with the MGI team in Stockton from Mayor Tubbs and everything. But it would be 100 Black women at or below 50% AMI. Everyone involved in the pilot would have a debit card with also a checking savings account attached to it, and the ability to have no fees for cash transfers to your bank account if you wanted to. The card would be loaded $500 every month. And the length of the pilot, we're looking to have it to be for 24 months. So $500 a month for 24 months. And then in that time, studying, because of the partnership MGI has, the Mayors for Guaranteed Income, will be able to track their spending on what they're spending it on. And through surveys and community engagement, just be able to have like a storytelling component to understand what they have experienced and how they have utilized the base income throughout the pilot.
And in other cities, and I want to go back to New in a minute, but in other cities, they found that people who get this at guaranteed income, they're not spending the money on the lottery or, going to clubs. They're spending the money on detergent. They're spending money, they're spending money on vegetables and fruit. They're spending money on life's necessities, not life's extras.
Yes, sir. There's a bunch of different pilots that have been done in different countries, but the most recent one, the one I was just finished in Stockton, and on March 3rd, they just released their findings. The people that pushed back said that there's no need to give money to the stigma, to give money to poor people, because they're going to spend it on booze and alcohol and cigarettes and the lottery and stuff like that. And this is the mayor's favorite quote thing to say is, and they were right, they did do that on about less than 1% of it. Less than 1% of the money spent was on alcohol and cigarettes, and everything else was on food, transportation, paying down bills, gateways to education, and an abundance of other things that that can be referenced from the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration was the name of it. So if you were go, and then just SEED is the acronym. So if you just search like SEED Stockton, you'll be able to find the findings from their white pages. But to your point, Rev, yeah, it was the vast majority of the money was spent on quality of life things to enhance the quality of life of all the pilot participants.
And you tell us, you have a report, you've mastered. Tell us kind of the challenges facing, specific challenges that are facing Black women in Pittsburgh. So I think we say that, but if you don't live it, one of the things I was driving through Homewood today, and I'm perhaps talking a lot because I'm very passionate about these issues. But if you drive, when I talk about Black poor communities, and I say that there are no white poor communities in Pittsburgh. There are only Black poor communities. People push against it. They'll say, well, what about Carrick? I'm thinking, no, you can't compare Carrick to Homewood, right? In Homewood, there are no grocery stores. There's no drugstores. There's no restaurants. There are no shoe stores. There are no fast food restaurant of any kind. There's only one gas station, and it's on the last block of it's on the last parcel of the last block of Homewood. For the most part, it doesn't service Homewood. And so you can't compare this. So talk about in Pittsburgh, sort of the real basic problems that Black women, challenges that they're facing, that your study found that they're facing.
The challenges have to do, so I guess I want to frame it for just a second, that one of the ways that American inequality has been justified in my lifetime, and I'm nearly 50, so just to give you a sense of the span, is that people don't work hard enough. And to take the example of Black women in Pittsburgh, and a lot of people, so that compared to other cities, white men experience more poverty in Pittsburgh, and they're doing the best of all of the racial groups. So poverty is a problem in our city, and then its most extreme representation is certain communities. They could work harder than anyone has ever worked, and their access to living wage is so predetermined to be so difficult that the majority of people, anyone in that situation, would find it very difficult to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It's not impossible. And I studied this, the American Dream, so I can say with no hesitation, the research is very clear. Most Americans cannot just pull themselves up, that in fact, between whites and people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, that the inherited wealth creates such a gap. And then when you create policies, for example, redlining, who can buy houses where, who can invest, and watch generation after generation, that's how you can get out of poverty. But if you are born in poverty, if you are impoverished by policies that explicitly keep you out and don't give you access to opportunities, to loans, to mortgages, etc. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of people in communities who are heads of households, as you said, a lot of women who are heads of households living in poverty in our area. A lot of them are Black women, and they are working inhumanely hard against a system that doesn't give and says, why don't you work harder? And the policies, for example, that have been created have been based on, as Oliver was saying about the MGI, on stereotypes and bias and assumptions that if they just changed how they behave, they will succeed, which is nonsense. It is just not true. The evidence, the research, none of it is there. And so we need to stop punishing people who've been impoverished by our policies. We need to create policies that enrich all of us, not just some of us in the country. And I think the guaranteed income program, I've been saying this for 20 years, poor people don't need a lot of forms and hoops and to prove their worthiness. It is a human right to be able to eat, and we are a human rights city, so I'm very comfortable saying that. And so give people money, and we see again and again, the pilots have shown us that, you know, you stop making people poor and they will positively contribute to the economy. So we all benefit. So I think I think of this very much in terms of structure, that if you wouldn't want to be a certain demographic in Pittsburgh, you need to fix what it is that that demographic is facing. If you would only want to be white in Pittsburgh, then you as a white person in Pittsburgh need to say, what can I do to make it so that anyone in this city can succeed on merit? So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, and I'll stop talking. But another example I've said is true. Statistics point out that if you're a white person who was born in Mount Lebanon and graduate from high school with no college at all, you will actually have a much higher standard of living in your lifetime than if you were born in Homewood with an undergraduate or even a graduate degree. That the location is so determinant. Where you were born at is so greatly determinant on your success than even education factors. It's almost amazing.
As someone who was in higher education for a decade as a professor, I just have to say that it breaks my heart, and that education was going to be the uplift, and incredibly highly educated Black communities, individuals, people of color. Once again, there's just a lot of assumptions that are made about people's worthiness that we just shouldn't stand for, that it's not acceptable. If policies are recommended for the future, I want to see a statement that says, how is this going to lift up our most vulnerable? The people at the top, if they're stable, I'm not going to worry about them right now. If they want more luxuries, too bad. I want to get people food, especially in food deserts. And once again, those were created. Those didn't just happen. They were created by policies that said, we are going to invest in certain neighborhoods and not in other neighborhoods. And we need to fix that history so that we have a future that actually, once again, I've done the research for a long, long time, and there will be more peace, less violence, and a better quality of life for all of us if we can help people pull themselves out of impoverished poverty situations. And in our city, that starts with a focus on Black women and listening to Black women and trusting Black women when they tell us this is what we need, not what you're trying to give us that we don't need.
So from your perspective, Anu, you've acknowledged that policies have put our community in the horrible situations that we're in. It's policies that have made the city of Pittsburgh one of the worst cities for Black women to live in. And obviously you're having a conversation with two policy makers. So from your perspective, what policies should we be looking at? Should we be considering? Should we be working on to try to change this situation and help people along, since, as you pointed out, they can't do it by themselves. They need assistance.
I think my answer is, and I wonder if Oliver, is because Oliver is much more of a policy expert and has a history with this. And so I don't want to, I would love to hear if he has thoughts. I definitely think the guaranteed income is one experiment that a year ago people said, we're still saying, as they've been saying for decades, that's a terrible idea. And then suddenly the interest of we need to think in a more visionary way. And so I do think that's a good experiment. I think Pittsburgh, from my research background, I think Pittsburgh is a perfect size city for us to pilot a lot of things, to really say reparations. This is the city. We've got the size. We need the political will, and we need our foundation communities to put millions of dollars into piloting things that are perhaps, they seemed outlandish to people, and we've got some research, we've got some things. But what I was going to say, rather than one policy issue, because the Gender Equity Commission is, we understand that gender impacts every single one of us, however we identify, male, female, gender, non-binary, there are systems of gender that impact us. And then of course, differently, if you're disabled, if you're in a certain age group. I think we need to have every policy in the city have an equity lens, that someone needs to read it before it gets voted on and approved and implemented, that someone looks at it and says, okay, who's being left out? How is this going to create barriers? What are the unintended consequences? Because I think very well-intentioned policy, and once again, I'm going to stop talking because I don't want to insult anyone who's an expert on policy like all of you are, but well-intentioned policy often forgets to say, what are the gendered impacts? What are the race-based impacts? What is the equity question, as Jessica, and hi Jessica was describing earlier, that equity lens needs to be systematic, and that's the policy change I guess I would like to see. And I'll stop talking.
Oliver, and then Jessica, continue. What do you think we need to do? What kind of policy changes do you want to see made?
For me personally, I think one of the largest, vast inequities amongst Black populations in this city, and it's not just this city; it's absolutely a national thing. It would be economic mobility. The three major contributing factors to economic mobility is the income, the ability to pay for education, home ownership, and wealth transfer. And for wealth transfer, for clarity, I'm not talking about redistribution of wealth. I'm talking about actual transferring of wealth intergenerationally. So to your point, Rev, if someone were to live in Mount Lebanon and they not go to college, they say they not want to go to college, they just wanted to go and be a fireman, the probability is higher that the wealth transfer from Mount Lebanon, that home, if one of your parents has a small business, whatever assets they accumulated from their parents, just the transfer alone of that wealth is going to be able to give that individual an influx of money that most of us from Black neighborhoods will never see in our lives, and also have never experienced. So the idea and the focus on the ability to transfer wealth and home ownership, I think, are extremely important in these next couple of years and decade. Is how do we continue to increase the ability to your earning potential, reducing barriers and providing more access and opportunity for wealth transfer. So that's starting small businesses or funding different businesses or creating different, or making sure we have representation in different industries, and of course home ownership, which is extremely low in Pittsburgh. Generations, that wealth transfer will start to pick up, and that in just from an economic standpoint, that changes everything, because I'm an avid believer in the economics of Black Pittsburgh is extremely important versus everything else.
And I may not have even asked the question the best way I could have, because there's sort of policies, and then there's also sort of programmatic changes that can be made, much of what Mr. Beasley was sort of talking about. You all may or may not be aware that last week, Reverend Burgess led a press conference where we talked about the URA going after a $22 million bond. And our goal in going after that bond is to really be able to focus in on home ownership, as Mr. Beasley was talking about, and really begin targeting those around 60, 50, 40% AMI who could take a property with assistance, be able to invest in that property, fix it up, rehab it, and now they're able to have a home ownership, many of whom are actually paying more in rent to live in poor conditions than it would to take if we were able to assist them, then their mortgage would actually cost. And that's sort of a programmatic way of getting at what Oliver was talking about. But there's other programmatic ways, and I know it's 6:45 now, and I know Jessica has a hard stop at 7, so I want to ask you a question, because you recently, along with 2 other of your colleagues, launched the EARN initiative. And I'm hoping that you could speak a little bit about that initiative, the impact that you hope it's going to have. You spoke about some of your corporate experiences at the beginning, but if you could just share a little bit about that, why you launched it, what it's looking to achieve. I know a little bit about it because I followed it, but for those who aren't as aware, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you for asking. So EARN, the Executive Action Response Network, was founded by myself and two other of my colleagues, leaders within their own industries and rights within within Pittsburgh. And our goal was really to elevate the response of Black professionals to the social unrest that are still all facing and have been facing, but was highlighted in June, summer 2020, and felt that our voices really weren't collectively at the table as it should, and wanting to leverage that voice to hold a corporate structure that we see as a petri dish of racism. And really we're one of the founding, where Plantations was an employer. So, maybe you didn't get paid, but that's the corporate structure that we're built from. And so we wanted to ensure that we had a voice there. And our ultimate goal is to improve the quality of African Americans in Pittsburgh. And we want to do that by facilitating economic empowerment through the elevation of talent into senior level leadership roles within our organizations here, increased procurement opportunities for African American businesses, significant increased spend to African American businesses and entrepreneurs, and informing the corporate structure to sustain that. So our goal was to share our perspective, but also to provide many recommendations and then the resources to execute if you're ready. And those recommendations included addressing the culture through anti-racism training. And so we scoured the country and identified a conscious anti-racism training to medical doctors that we believe really have a unique way of addressing racism and helping us with the competencies to identify it in ourselves real time. We also wanted to ensure that organizations, as they were now hiring and moving forward with DEI roles, that they had support that organizations need, and those people need resources. They need staff. Usually they're underfunded. How can we provide and augment support to actually make those strategies more successful? Health equity was another recommendation, and another organization I'm a part of founding, Health Desk, which allows people to elevate the voice of patients real time while they're receiving biased care real time. And so that's a service that they can implement right now. And then the corporate staffing structure and partners. So we actually started a corporate staffing firm, EARN Staffing Solutions, from temp to executive leadership, with the focus of African American advancement across a variety of different roles and industries. So we are really excited about the momentum. However, there is not nearly enough corporate leaderships that have called us and taken the step to move forward in this direction. We want us to go from clickbait and multi-million-dollar investment announcements, and I'm sure execution, to actually making that work for the people that work for them and with them. And so that's what EARN aims to do. And hopefully we can give everyone a "You Earned It" badge at some point in time. And there's criteria for that, from the cultural work to the actual doing the job of hiring Black leaders and keeping them there because your culture welcomes them.
So Nu, I would argue that Oliver, for the last 10 years, our city has been one of the most thoughtful and progressive cities in the country for designing and implementing policy to uplift African Americans, whether it's the Housing Opportunity Fund, whether it's Emerge Pittsburgh, whether it's Catapult, whether it's any of just a slew in. You will be able to find some of these policy pointers on our Black Pittsburgh Matters Facebook page, YouTube, and eventually the city's website. But I guess, why is it? And when I hear sometimes a counter argument saying that, well, it's still not enough, and I guess I'll ask you that question. But why haven't we, in a year or two, solved the problem for African Americans in the city of Pittsburgh? Why do you think there's still this anger, even though we have invested millions upon millions of dollars, innovative programming? Councilman Lavelle and I have been in partners. I think we've probably passed more legislation collectively in this issue than any council people before us, and maybe more than most council people in the country. But there's still this, you haven't done enough. What you've done and so far doesn't count. What's your response to that?
Speaking specifically about both of your legislative offices and the administration that I serve, it is about 4 years since I've been serving, and the ingrained visceral policies and practices are decades old, and were meant to last. So it takes longer than the last couple of years to. It takes longer than the last couple of years to completely undo white supremacy. So I don't every day, at least from my perspective, in my work within the Office of Equity and the legislation that comes from your two offices, it's where we chip at it every day. But it's going to take a long time, not just in Pittsburgh, but throughout the country. And to a certain extent, I get the urgency and care from those who expect more and better from us public servants, and that is why we need to get up every day and continue to serve. But just being able to, like me personally, it took me a long time of reading articles and talking to people a lot more educated than I am to wrap my mind around this whole economic mobility thing and how all things are connected. And focusing on economic mobility may be a area that is less talked about and less focused on in the area. And I can't remember anyone before me, focusing on something like that. So it just takes time. And me personally, being a resident of the city of Pittsburgh, taxpaying resident, I just want to say I am grateful for your leadership, both you, Councilman Burson and Councilman Lavelle. Going back to the question that Councilman Lavelle raised about policies and legislation for economic mobility. Even just your work on 177A and the work that it's been able to produce the last couple of years has been phenomenal. So thank you for that. But you're not doing your job right if you're not getting attention. So I just appreciate it and I just continue to serve.
Why? Yeah, come on. Why haven't we solved every problem in Black Pittsburgh over the last couple of years?
Oliver go, because he covered it. Yes. So I guess it just seems naive to think that systems that were built over centuries will go away. And that has to, there's both, these are very entrenched systems. They're deep into the policies that rule our lives, how resources have been allocated. And then there's also a kind of benign neglect all the way to outright hatred. And we, with anti-Asian attacks around the country, we need, Pittsburgh is stronger than hate. Many of us believe that, but if we want to actually show that, then those of us who can have a good quality of life in Pittsburgh, I came from elsewhere, it's a very affordable city, so some of us can come and appreciate the benefits of Pittsburgh. We owe it to everyone else in the city to make sure that we say, how am I making this change happen? Because we have to chip away at it, all of us together. And I wanted to, now that you got some really expert policy advice, I also wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the Gender Equity Commission in June of last year put out a set of policy recommendations for City Council and the Mayor's office called Building an Equitable New Normal, and it's on the City of Pittsburgh website. And part of how it's written is both for our policymakers to see what's doable, but anyone in any organization can start right now. And so part of it is everyone has to see this as our collective problem, and everyone has to bring their problem-solving brains. Then maybe in 5 years, if all of us focus, perhaps we'll fix a few things. And then hopefully in my lifetime, like I said, we'll do another report and we'll say we are not getting worse. I'm determined that we cannot get worse in quality of life for people in Pittsburgh, but hopefully we can say we've made some improvements.
We will absolutely be making improvements. I think one, your work on the Gender Equity Commission, the work that Ms. Brooks is doing, I know she had to move on to another meeting, but she was invaluable with the input and insight that she has, the work that Oliver is doing on the mayor's side. Everyone, and it needs to be acknowledged, is putting in a lot of work to move us forward. And so I just really want to thank you all. We are up against our hour, and I know you all have busy lives and schedules and other things to do. And so I just want to take a minute to thank all our guests, starting with Dr. Jane, the Executive Director of the Gender Equity Commission, Ms. Brooks Woods, the co-founder of the EARN Initiative and CEO of Pittsburgh Business Group on Health, and Mr. Oliver Beasley, the policy analyst for the Office of Equity. And what I will lastly say, because I've said this for a long time, despite all the negative statistics that we hear, to the best of my knowledge, one of the most educated individuals in our country is a woman of color. One of the primary business starters, one of the primary individuals to start a business is a woman of color. And so if we are really going to begin lifting up our community, investing in women of color, and especially in the city of Pittsburgh, Black women, it only makes sense and only for our long-term economic viability. And so I just want to thank all of what you all are doing and just acknowledge that in order to have a significant investment in the Black community, it is imperative that we make our community safe and peaceful, and that we are committed to rebuilding our Black communities in Pittsburgh for Black people by Black people with our partners and allies.
I want to thank all of you for watching and participating in this town hall meeting. Remember, you can watch this show on Facebook, the city's YouTube channel, or the city's cable channel. A new meeting will occur every Wednesday. By working together, united in purpose, we can transform our city, strengthening it for all of its residents. Pittsburgh is becoming a city for all by becoming a city where Black Pittsburgh matters. Stay safe, good evening, and be blessed.